Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Rose, for agreeing to do this. As you
Yes.
may or may not know, I've been on this mission to increase awareness and decrease stigma when it comes to addiction, food addiction, eating disorders, disordered eating, body image,
Mhm.
all of the above. And
Yeah.
so I just appreciate your willingness to be with me today. And
Oh.
I'm hopeful that you will introduce
Mhm.
yourself for our listeners, our audience.
Yes. Okay, so my name is Rose Coates. I'm from Tacoma, Washington. I'm 55 years old, and I have had issues with food, or food has had issues with me since I was 3.5. So is there more that you want me to offer?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the introduction.
Okay,
Absolutely.
okay.
If you were
Mhm.
willing, would you talk a bit about what life was like before you started, your journey of
Okay,
recovery or whatever kind of label you're putting on it, your healing path?
sure. Yeah, so like for the first, I would say like 47 years of my life, I have been a food addict, a sugar addict, emotional eater, compulsive overeater. You can call it everything under the sun. It started when I was about 3.5 years old, eating dried dog food, raw meat, petroleum jelly, the whole nine. I grew up in a chaotic and abusive household, and food was almost always my comfort, my go-to. And that just lasted throughout childhood. I just remember eating sugar, gigantic, the king size candy bars, big homemade cookies from the school cafeteria. They were like a quarter a piece. I would eat like 5 or 6 at lunch. It was just continual chips, candy, sugar, the corner store, just food. I was a continual eating machine, but they always said that I was like a child from Ethiopia. I could eat all that I wanted to, but I had a big stomach and a really skinny body. And because I didn't learn how to manage, life as a child, all those things that I learned with eating and just outburst and all that good stuff carried over into adulthood. So food was with me from the time that I was 3.5 all the way when I was 18.5, got married just before I delivered my child at 19, I mean at 20, I'm sorry. And then I weighed 300 pounds and I stayed at 300 pounds literally with the exception of yo-yo dieting and whatnot. There were brief moments that I had a few pounds weight loss, but food was my top priority.
So what was kind of
Outs
your aha moment in all of that? Or maybe you're
my
getting there and I'm jumping the
No,
gun.
no, no,
Yeah.
no, that's
Yeah.
fine that you intervened. So I was compulsive with everything. My aha moment came, I used to always be in denial. I'm not an addict. I don't have any issues, yada, yada, yada. I'm better than that. But Benton Johnson, I don't know if I stumbled upon her or just heard word, oh, I know what it was. A counterpart to, I went through a lot of coaching certifications, and Anna Fruling did a sugar assessment on me, and she was talking about the training that she had gotten through Benton Janssen. And when she did the sugar assessment on me, I was still in denial. I was hard struck. I enrolled in Benton Janssen's course to learn about how to use the sugar assessment. And all the while, I was like, this is not me. This is not me. So actually, in June of 2018, let me backtrack. June of 2018, I had hit my ultimate rock bottom. I was tapped out, going through perimenopause, gained a substantial amount of weight again. I was still over exercising, just eating everything under the sun. And now I know it was because of carbs, because of the way I was eating and whatnot. But it all caught up to me, and I was really questioning, is this all there is to life, right? Questioning my career, my sanity, the whole nine. And I found out about ketones, the ketogenic diet, but it still took me another 6 months before I made that desperate last attempt. And December 2nd, 2018, I started intermittent fasting and the ketogenic diet, and I did everything under the sun wrong. And then as time went on and I was learning more and more, then me and Anna, our paths crossed. And then doing the assessment and, taking Benton's course, I was still in denial, still binging, still eating all the wrong foods, but I was on my way to recovery, if that makes sense. And I will always be in recovery because, eating the wrong food sends me down that rabbit hole. But it took 4 years of learning about me to understand that there's certain foods I can never, ever eat again without risking going down that path.
So can you talk a little bit about that? Like, was it
Yeah.
just like one day you were just like, okay, I'm ready. Like I'm ready to move forward in
Yeah,
this different way,
yeah,
or was it
yeah.
something different?
Well, September 2018, I had turned 50, and I hope that most of us listening do believe in a higher power. I There was a distinct voice that said if I stayed in corrections for another 7 years, which is what I was trying to do to get to my 30 years, it distinctly told me that if I tried to stay for another 7 years, I would be so depressed that there would be no returning from it. Does that make sense? And I started making the transition to get out of that career. And quite honestly, I left that career. I cashed out my retirement so I could spend the next 4 to 5 years on a hiatus, a sabbatical, trying to figure my life out and get well. So that was really the turning point when I heard God clearly say to me that I needed to leave and to take care of myself. And then on December 2nd, I started implementing strategies. And then by April 1st, 2019, I left service. And it was really, really dark for about a year or two. And then it got a little bit brighter, and whatnot. So, yeah.
Can you take us through that a little bit? Like
Mhm,
how it can be so dark or difficult in the
mhm,
beginning. And
mhm.
how did you find like the strength? Like, how did you persevere? Like, what was like your motivation, or how did you get that momentum?
My momentum, my motivation is that everything that I had did prior to December 2nd, 2018 did not work for me. It didn't work. And it was time to try something new. And I couldn't out exercise what I'd been doing because I'd been doing that since I was 20 and it didn't work. It was just a roller coaster. Um, my depression was always rearing its ugly head, but I was always conditioned to smile and say it really didn't matter and just pretend everything was okay. There was dark moments where I thought that I didn't want to be here anymore, with suicidal tendencies when I was younger. And I had my grandchildren by then, so they were probably about 2 years old at the time. And I was like, nobody needs me anymore. I don't need to pay the mortgage anymore, that kind of stuff. So I just said, I have to just keep believing that tomorrow is going to be better than today. And even if I don't do it perfectly, with the education that I'm seeking and the help that I'm seeking, it will get better. And it eventually did get better. But I binged an awful lot, ate a lot of the wrong things until I eventually caught on in August of 2020 that this is the way we need to go.
Right.
Yeah.
So thinking
Yeah.
about like those binges that were happening, like
Yeah.
you had like enough information to get yourself started, but not
Yes.
maybe like all of the information that you
Yeah.
needed for your
Yeah.
specific case.
Yes.
Then you get the specific information and
Mm.
it's a totally different thing.
It's a totally different thing because I was willing to apply it and learn it, but I was still trying to circumvent it and say, I can moderate this. I can do this. I can have, McDonald's for 5 days and then get back on the wagon. But that's not the case. It would take 2 weeks before I actually got back onto a ketogenic protocol. So I had the tools, but I had to be willing to implement them over and over and over again. Yeah.
So doing that over and over again and then saying, I wasn't perfect in it either.
Right.
I was consistent. I
Right.
mean, is that still true today, that it's more consistency than like intensity or perfection, or is it different today?
Well, today I have my rhythm. I know what works for me. I know what my triggers are. I know what to abstain from. And I essentially follow a carnivore diet just because I don't want to be triggered. There's some things that I can eat, like stevia and Zevia drinks. I can do it periodically and not be triggered. So I did the trial and error, but I'm essentially carnivore, like 95% carnivore, and I drink black coffee. So I've dialed in what works for me and what my preferences are. Yeah.
Which is
Yeah.
huge. I mean, when I work with clients, we kind of have this like hierarchy where we say like, okay, remove the things that are lighting up your brain like a Christmas tree.
Yes.
So any of the drug foods.
Yes.
Then remove like anything that like is causing you a health problem. So if you're lactose intolerant, celiac, whatever, right? Like get those things out. If you're allergic to peanuts, like please, for the love of God, let's not be eating peanuts. And then it's preference, right? And I always say like, listen, raisins for me do not light up my brain like a Christmas tree. I've had a raisin every way you can have a raisin in 39 years of life. I just don't like them. I'm not allergic to them. I'm just never going to eat them. So I remove them. So to know that you took yourself through that process, and then what you were left with is like a very meat forward way of eating. Cause it sounds like you're not 100% strict in it. Like you have a few things that you feel comfortable having.
Yes.
So what was that process like? Like, did you go straight there, or did you have support? Like, how did you do that?
This is something that I want to be candid with. There is so much support out there that it's kind of amazing. I'm one of those women that have always said, it's all about me, it's for me. I've got to do this for me. I don't need anybody to help me. And I think seeking education was my way of helping myself without asking people for help. But I do want to tell your audience that if people feel as though that they need help, they don't have to struggle by themselves, that they need to reach out to an online community or however they choose to learn and get support. But it was my pride, a lot of times, my pride. And actually, I just joined an online community because I'm like, I can do this by myself, but it'd be a lot easier and a lot better with other people. So at 55, I'm finally saying I don't have to do it alone, even though I felt as though I needed to do it alone.
And was it that community that helped you get to that place where you are with carnivore now? Or did you work with like a individual, like professional nutritionist? Like, how did you get to that place?
I got to that place just by trial and error, doing it over and over and over and over again, and just observing how I felt after I ate, and just, learning. But the community that I'm becoming a part of, the reason I actually joined is because they're all carnivores, right? It took a while for me to find this place, and they're just starting up. So I don't feel as though I'm coming in and everybody knows everybody and all that good stuff. So I'm not as intimidated or overwhelmed.
Right. You don't have to try to fit in where there's already
Right.
like groups of whatever people going on. Yeah. So when we think about like, okay, those early days, did you experience withdrawals? And if so, during that, did your depression, anxiety, did that get worse? Did it get better? Can you kind of talk about like early days as far as like your experience of like getting off the foods and what that was like mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually?
Okay, are we allowed to curse on this show?
You go for it. I'm here for recovery and reality.
Recovery and reality it was a fucking shit show. I was a hot mess from the Pacific Northwest, y'all. I was a hot mess. And I think some of the things that helped me through it was because I love to exercise. But like I said, I abused that. And that was taken away from me because of joint pain, being, 70 pounds more than what I am today, and just the whole nine. I just didn't want to sit down and deal with my emotions. I didn't want to deal with learning new skills. I just didn't want to deal with life in general. And still having the tendency that, I'm still making progress, but I can still stuff my feelings down with food and stuff. It was really dark for a really long time, but what helped is one foot in front of the other and just talking it out in my brain and doing a lot of thought downloads, whereas I'd write stuff down and just throw it away. I don't want to ever look back and see what I wrote yesterday, but I'm willing to do it for today for about 5 minutes and throwing it away. getting it out my mind that way. And as far as like the sugar withdrawals, those were continual, because what I didn't realize that I was doing was I'd be 5 or 6 days without sugar or processed food or whatever it was. And then I'd go right back into that cycle without giving myself a chance of 30 days, 60 days, thinking because it fell into this keto or this many carbs, I was doing myself a disservice, but I didn't know. So I just kept getting back on that wheel. And then, like I said, August 2020 was my last organized binge, and I finally got it, and things started getting better from there. So it took about 30 to 45 days for my system to get kind of clean, is what I like to call it, clean enough to be clear enough.
And then after that, did you find like the anxiety, depression, like the mood swing, mental health stuff that you had experienced
Yeah,
earlier in your life? Like,
yeah.
did that improve at all, or did it stay the
That
same, get worse?
that balanced out, because as my hormones balanced out, everything started just leveling out. There was a certain zen or certain easiness about me that I hadn't felt in years. I was just calm again. And I wasn't so angry, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I found the
yeah.
same. I found like, I didn't realize like how much of a rager I was like, and then I didn't anymore. And I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize I was so
Yeah,
angry.
yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah,
what is your life like now? Like, how do you, it sounds like you were in you were in one career, you took a
yeah,
sabbatical to get well.
yeah.
Like, what is life like today? What do you do in the day to day?
So in the day-to-day, I'm a paraeducator now. So I'm starting on a new career path, and we're going to see how that goes for the next year or two. But I work with students that are 18 to 21. I'm a job coach, and I work with them. And my life is pretty routine during the week. I get up, go work out, go to work, come home, eat, walk the dog, that good stuff. So it's pretty routine. And I have the same preferences, like I said, as far as eating. I only eat one meal a day. And beef is my go-to, hamburger patties, scrambled ground beef, eggs. It's just very generic, very basic. The highlight as far as consuming anything is coffee, black coffee. So are you wanting me to talk about what do I do to stay well?
Yeah, I'm gonna get there, but
Okay.
I'm
Oh,
more like,
okay.
but something that I
Okay.
feel like you called it routine, but I'm like, I
Yeah,
follow you on Facebook, and I feel
yeah.
like you're always, maybe not always is the wrong word, but that you are a runner, and
Yeah,
you are doing like races and
yeah.
challenges and things. And as not like, I am not a runner, so that always like amazes me when people are into
Yeah,
like, I'm just gonna put on shoes and go for a few hours. Will you talk
yeah.
a bit about that? Like, have you always loved doing that, or where did that come from?
So that started somewhere around 2000, And I started running as a way to lose weight, one of those pillars to lose weight, but it was very therapeutic. Exercise in any form is very therapeutic for me. And there was a couple of years between 2018 and 2020 where my joints and weight and all that good stuff, it was a little much. So I had to do a lot more power walking than racing. And then recently I had to go to an orthopedic specialist because I'm getting older, and they're saying that there's no cartilage in my knees. And I have a choice to kind of like scale back on the running and, have longer years life in my knees, or to keep pounding it out and then be looking at, you know, replacements sooner rather than later. So I've made the decision to just do 2 or 3 races a year starting this year. And to be on my treadmill, I invested in a really good treadmill to do all my miles there. So it's more therapy than anything for me, but I lift a lot of weights too. So I lift weights for about 4 hours a week. So that helps. Yeah.
Yeah, because I couldn't imagine like if that was one of my major tools, right? Like one of my
Mhm.
go-to tools for managing stress,
Yes.
emotions, you name it, right? Like just life
Uh,
in general, because we all
Yeah.
know, right? Like we hear all the time runner's high. Like we know
Yeah.
there's real science behind all of that. I mean, I can't imagine that that is easy to hear.
You know, it's not easy to hear, but I have a rower and a spin bike also, and I go to 2 gyms or I can go outside. It doesn't matter. So I have access all around me. And it's kind of like making and being responsible. It's kind of like with your eating. If you know that these things are not good for you and you continue to consume them despite the consequences, then that's your choice at a certain point, right? And the same thing with exercise. Am I willing to be so vain as to keep going, to keep, saying that I did this, or do I want to last longer and never have any replacement? So it was hard, but I got through it. I got through it. And I'm in an
Yeah.
okay place now. Yeah.
Also, so then like these things that you talk about, these like the bike and like an
Mhm.
elliptical and those kinds, are those like reasonable replacements? Like, do you get the same effect? No, you don't get the same
Nowhere
effect.
near. I have a rower. I don't do the elliptical.
Oh,
Those
okay.
bother me. I'm like, oh, yeah. But no, I don't get the same effect. But mentally, I'm well enough to know.
So you can accept that this
Yes.
it's as good as it gets with this.
Yes.
And while it's not the same thing, like it's like this balance of like, do I
Yes.
wreck my body forever,
Yeah.
or do I keep doing what I'm doing?
Exactly. Just keep things balanced, and just I like variety. So go to this gym one day, work out at home the next day, whatever it is, just keep it moving. And I don't want to ever have to rely on anything to help me to stay mobile. Right. So yeah.
That's amazing. I just think about, because so often again, like, especially like early people who are early days in recovery, right? Like, I think we get hyper focused on like one or two things that's working for us, right? And amen, it's the bridge that gets us through. But then if we don't start, what I'm hearing you like
Yeah.
share, right, is like if we don't kind of start like expanding like our self-development
Mhm.
and be willing to like try out these other things, there may come a day when that tool is taken away from, just like the food is often like,
Yes.
right, like the last house on the street. Once that's
Yeah.
gone, and now all of a sudden I've got to face life without anything,
Yeah. Yeah.
that we want to keep like those recovery tools also just as
Yeah.
a diverse.
Right. So this is also, speaking of food, it's
Yeah.
kind of like, although I was letting food go and trying to be more responsible and be an advocate for myself, it's like all this noise in my head has slowly subsided. It's kind of like I've given up all these foods for my health and my mental wellness, right? To be candid, I still am a volume eater, if that makes sense. So that's one of the reasons why I'm OMAD, because I recognized early on that this obsession with food, having 3 meals a day, does not work for me if I'm going to make that cut and start eating better food, right? So eating the one huge meal a day works for me as far as the volume. But even with that one huge meal, I know that I'm still overeating. I've known this for a couple of years, right? But because my weight is stable, I don't worry about it, right? And my lab results are great. I don't worry about it, but I still know that those cues or those satiety signals, when I feel them, but I still have food left on my plate. So that's a part of what I'm working through this year and hoping to resolve it, and by joining this community and by continually growing and whatnot. So it takes a lot of work, regardless of the tools we have in place. We can still learn and grow, right?
Absolutely. Well, and I
Yeah.
think not only can we still learn and grow, but I think like
Yeah.
our it changes, right? And so that
Yes.
that like makes me wonder, like, how would you know, like what evidence would have to show up that would let you know, like, hey, OMAD isn't working for me anymore, or this volume at one meal in
Mhm.
general isn't working for me
Yeah.
anymore, or I need to change things up. And I'm not saying it will. I'm just like,
Yeah.
what would let you know, hey, I've got to do something different.
Well, to be quite candid, if I gained weight, if it was out of the range that I had set for myself, or if my lab work indicated that there were some problems, and they could only trace it back to what I ate or the volume that I ate, And I eat early enough in the day that I work it out. It's not like I'm eating and then 2 hours later I'm going to sleep on it. Does that make sense? So it has a chance. And I think I still eat a large amount due to that's how I was raised. I was like given tons and tons and tons of food. And I don't know if there's just like a disconnect there that says if I let this go, I'm letting go of everything pertaining to food other than it being nutrition, right? There's a certain level of comfort that's still there for me.
For sure. So it sounds like
Yeah.
you said, like, that's kind of like your journey this year is like
Yeah.
narrowing in on what's going on there and
Yeah.
paying more attention to cues, but also it sounds like relying on this community to give you feedback when you have
Mhm.
questions, and
Mhm.
maybe take some of that feedback and use it or try it out. Is
Yeah.
that the
Yes.
intention? Okay.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay.
Yes.
So can you kind of talk to us about like your daily like non-negotiables or weekly non-negotiables when it comes to your recovery? Like, what does your day or your week look like in order for you to stay, clean, like you were saying, or to
Yeah.
stay stable?
So my daily non-negotiables as far as self-care and to stay clean is I must always have Black coffee because that's my treat to myself. So if I want 3 cups or if I want 10, there's no limits on that. I'm cool with that. Um, Water, at least a gallon of water, and foods that I prepare every day that I prefer, right? So if it's something that's kind of iffy, I'm not going to touch it. I'm not going to go there. And then exercise has to fit in somewhere. Walking the dog, riding the spin bike, whatever, it has to fit in there somewhere. And a stress-free, drama-free zone while I'm eating. So that's usually, my time. I block it out, watch TV, whatever it is, and no judgment. And as far as what I do to stay on top of things, I listen to a lot of podcasts, a lot of YouTube. So I do that for a few hours a day while driving or doing whatever, and just continual learning. Yeah.
Do you do, or maybe not currently, but like over
Yeah.
the years, because again, like, right, we're all on this journey. I don't care what age this all started. Like, we've done a lot of things over the years, I'm sure, right,
Yes.
to try to address this.
Yeah.
What kinds of things have you done for self-development other than like listening to podcasts, and
Mhm.
and you sound like a really like insightful, like independently driven individual.
Yeah.
Have you ever like done any sort of like therapy or
Mhm.
workshops that like
Mhm.
pertain to self-development in any way, like emotional sobriety or emotional
Yeah.
intelligence kinds of things, or anger management, like anything? Have any of those things ever been a part of your healing story?
So this is the thing. Because the abuse happened in my household, because it was my natural father, and because I grew up with a stepmother who was Asian, so there was a lot of disconnect within that household. And being Black in my community growing up in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, what stays in our home, what happens in our home stays in our home. So I can't speak for all Black people, but for me, that's how I was raised. And even when I did, as a child, try to tell a school counselor that I was being abused and whatnot, and they addressed it, it was turned back on me. Does that make sense? My stepmother blamed me, my father blamed me, and my aunts that I tried to tell, they blamed me. And so there was really nobody that I trusted to help me, because when I tried to tell and get help, I didn't get help. And then there was this one time, maybe when I was about 22 or so, I actually found a Black counselor. I felt as though the person had to look like me without me having to explain everything. And because I went to her specifically to help me with childhood sexual abuse, trauma issues and whatnot, she had like a 6 or 8 week session with, what are those groups called? Like sex, like abuse survivors.
Yeah.
And this is the thing, I attended, I would come late, I would come with Kentucky Fried Chicken, I would just show up with candy and whatnot. And I always thought that everybody else's story was more important and more valid than mine because that's how I grew up, right? So after that, I didn't seek help. It was always Phil Donahue or Oprah Winfrey or books. And so leaving corrections, I went to the life coach school thinking that, oh, I'm going to go to life coach school. Brooke Castile is so beautiful. She's had issues in her life. I can identify, which I couldn't because she was a blonde-haired white woman and she was rich, but I was like dreaming, right? So I thought I could essentially step from one career path into the other. But God was like, girl, your work is just beginning, So yeah, I've always been obsessed with personal growth workshops, courses. It's still ongoing even now. Yeah.
With it being though that you're doing work, it's not just I'm reading these books and I'm listening to them on tape and I'm just like going to somehow change by osmosis. Like you're showing up and doing the work. And as you were sharing that, I'm like, I feel like I grew up the same way. What happened in our house, right? What happened behind closed doors stayed behind closed doors. And if God forbid, if somebody found out, like you got it so much worse, right? So much worse. But to know that you never gave up on yourself. Like, even though you had those experiences of like asking for help and it didn't work out for you, you still persevered and still continue to do that work. And I think that you can't teach that. You know what I mean? You can try and you can try to encourage it, but there's something in you that's like, I deserve better. I'm worth more. There's something in there and you're doing that. And I just have to ask, because you've mentioned corrections a couple of times. I worked in corrections for all of 8 years and I had to get out. What did you do in corrections?
So I directly supervised inmates. I worked directly with the population. I worked in the clinic. I was an escort for contractors that came in. So the last 10 years that I was there, it was like gravy duty, so to speak. I got some pretty good positions and whatnot, but I worked directly with the population. And this craziest thing, there's two things that I might have overlooked. First and foremost, that as a food addict or somebody who just loves to eat, I had multiple things going on at once. I loved to shop. And actually I used to steal as a child. I used to shop for food. I used to steal people's lunches, the whole nine. So that has always been a part of my story, that I love to shop, right? For food, for clothing, for whatever it was. But also when my daughter was around 12, so this might have been about 20 something years ago, in order for me to cope with the line of work that I was in, raising a family and just the chaos, my weekends were during the week. In order for me to cope, I would go wait for my family to go to bed, which is my husband and daughter and dog. I would go across the way to Burger King every Tuesday night, get a few hamburgers, French fries, and some kind of pie that they had. That was my routine for quite a while. And then it grew into alcohol. I would have a bottle of wine to get me through my weekend. So I was quickly relying on food and alcohol, shopping, all these other things. And the same thing with racing and running. I would sign up for 5 races at a time. It was an addiction, right? So with alcohol, because it ran in my family, my husband's side of the family, it took me and my daughter going to the liquor store years ago, having her sit in the car, me running up to the door, they're closed, holiday, whatever, going across the parking lot to Safeway and saying, oh, let me go in here and get some alcohol. But looking at her and saying, what message is this sending? That was number one. And working with inmates, I kind of saw that they were addicted to alcohol, drugs, making fast money, whatever it was. But I slowly connected the dots. They're addicted to substances that are illegal. Mine happens to be legal, right? But eventually combining the alcohol, it wouldn't be that long, I don't think, before I made a slip in judgment and not only drank on my weekends, but started into my weeknights where I had to go to work the next morning. So I chose at that point, after a couple of years of doing this, I chose food, right? So that's what I wanted to interject, but I forgot what your question was. I'm so sorry.
No,
Molly.
absolutely. No, I was asking you about that because it's so funny because my work in corrections, I started when I was 22, and that was really the thing that opened my eyes to, because so the facility that I worked in was not a prison. We contracted with the Department of Corrections. It was a 40-bed all-male facility, and they were coming specifically to, so we're what's called a pre-release. So they get to go out and work, but they come back. We do counts, we do urinalysis, right? Like we do all the things. We're responsible to the Department of Corrections for them, but we were treating substance use disorder and criminality. And then the guys with mental illness were falling through the cracks, which is what made me want to go back and get my master's degree in mental health. But the reason why I asked was because I was like, oh my God, like that is where I realized that what I was experiencing was what they were experiencing. And like the only difference between them and me was like what side of the counter we were on at any given point in the day. And the work that they were doing and the groups that I was running, I realized I had to do my own work too. And this is long before I knew anything about like the food. Like I knew I was emotional eating, but I thought like, oh, Molly, you're just a codependent because of like the really effed up childhood you had, right? With an active alcoholic father, narcissistic personality disorder mother, like the chaos, right? Where everybody else's needs were so much more important than your own, that kind of thing. And so I was just really curious if that at all played a part in your self-development and kind of moving you along on this path to saying, I've got to put down some of these things.
It opened my eyes, but I was still in denial because, like I said, I left service in 2019, and it was only when I decided to leave service on my 50th in 2018 that I actually started doing the work.
Yeah. So then with all of that, you said, okay, in the end you chose food. So does that mean that you're a non-drinker?
Oh, I haven't touched alcohol in over 4 years.
Wow,
Yeah.
nice.
I made that decision because I knew that that would be the next full-blown illness for me. It was just kept under wraps because I was like, I'm a weekend drinker, I can handle this. But then if I would have had that, what would have been next? Would it have been drugs? I'm terrified of drugs, but because I'm not getting high enough off of food and alcohol, who knows what it would have been, right?
Right.
So, yeah.
And clearly the races, you've like been able to back off on because of some other, what about the shopping? What does it look like for the shopping? Does that still play out in that same cycle?
It doesn't play out because I spent the last like 2-3 years just purging my house of stuff. I've become a minimalist in a way. But as far as shopping, I might buy 3 of one things, like 3 sweatshirts in the same style, but I'm still a minimalist on that because I give them away to people that need them, right? But I've been doing better because as a paraeducator, my salary isn't what it once was. And I'm becoming more mindful. So yeah, I tend to splurge on my granddaughters now versus me, myself, and I. Yeah.
Isn't that funny? I mean, I feel like I noticed a similar thing that like, if like I was doing well with food early, like I'm talking like years ago before I like finally put the pieces together myself. Like if I was doing fine with food or like how I felt like I was eating, my money was like crazy. Or if my money was together, then right. But it was like once those, it's so funny, like how they are so connected that it's like, once I figure out like, oh, okay, nice and easy. Like it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be this all or nothing black and white, but like, if we can find this kind of like gray and not even gray area, but like the messy middle where we can find that balance and do our work. It's like, oh, I don't have to let my anxiety drive me to go do this. Like, what do they call it? Like, shopping therapy or whatever they try to be funny about, I don't have to do that anymore. And then the same can be true for the food. The food doesn't have to be the solution to whatever it is that's happening, even though that was true for us when we were little, because it was the only thing we had.
Yes. And now you want to take it away from me. What am I supposed to do?
Yes, exactly. And it's so funny because that is probably, I would say, the number one, like when people want to do like a consultation call, right? Or they're curious, it's like they're curious. It's like they know it's that ambiguity. They know like something's got to change, and I know it's the food, but then as soon as I'm like, it's we got to start with the food. They're like, well,
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm
Yeah.
ready yet. And then they go away. And then sometimes they come back in a few weeks, a few months.
Yeah.
Sometimes they don't come back at all. And that's okay
Yeah.
too. You know, like I'm not here to hold anybody hostage, but it's so, I mean, I can so empathize, like when that has been your solution or your
Mhm.
comfort or your drug for decades,
Mhm.
the
It's
thought
like,
of,
what now?
yeah, well, and
Yeah.
especially when, like you said, was like, it's legal. Like nobody's going to show up and like arrest you for having the
Yes.
McFlurry.
Yeah.
You can do that.
Not just one, but 5. Yeah, I got you. Yeah,
Exactly.
so I was gonna say, when you said that you start with your clients with food, see, even though I knew that I was supposed to start there, I didn't start there. I still started the other way, if that makes sense. And then 2 years in, I got to the food part, clearing the deck so I could have clear brain space, right? So for your audience, start with the food. Listen to Molly, start with the food so you can think clearly and make rational choices. Yeah, start with the food.
Well, I mean, to be honest, Rose, like
Yeah.
I didn't start with the food either, but that's because
Oh,
I didn't know I was dealing with addiction. Right. So
okay.
I am a
Okay.
licensed mental health and a licensed addiction counselor, and it
Okay.
never occurred to me that there could be an addiction here. But now that right, like now that that is what I've absolutely put together, that's absolutely where I start with my clients. But yeah, no, to be honest, I didn't either. It was
Okay.
doing all of that other work, right? It was like
Yeah.
setting boundaries and becoming more
Yeah.
emotionally intelligent, all of those things. And I think that's what made it so and I'm going to say easy in quotations here, but like
Mhm.
that's what made it easier for me, I think, to put down the food because it was the last puzzle piece.
Okay.
Where if you're
Okay.
starting with food, right, it can be
Yeah.
the most difficult because you know what's coming. Like you have to deal with all of those things without it.
Yeah.
Where I got that, I had that,
Okay.
right? I
Okay.
have, but I mean, and here's the thing too.
Yeah.
I work with people wherever they're at. If they're not ready to put it down all the
Yes.
way either, that's fine.
Yes.
We'll look at the other stuff, but
Mhm.
it's like going to a session with me always under the influence of methamphetamine or
Yeah.
alcohol. We're only going to get so far and we're going to repeat a lot of stuff
Yeah.
and you're going to feel like it's a waste of time and your money. So
Mhm.
the way that we get past that is you have to start coming to me with a clear brain,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
that clear brain is only going to come if we stop putting the substances in there.
Amen, sister. And I almost wished that when I went through those 6 weeks or 8 weeks of group um, counseling with that one person, with that one counselor, if she would have just said that I couldn't come with food, that I had to come with a clear conscience, or whatever, that may have helped me in a different way by setting those boundaries early on, but everything is 2020 in hindsight. But yeah, I wonder what would have happened if I showed up without my crutch, right? Maybe I would have contributed more instead of stepping more.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
like you said, coulda, shoulda, woulda, but knowing that moving forward,
Yes,
right?
yes,
You
yes.
won't like show up with food at a
Yeah,
group meeting with
yeah,
your new community, even
right.
if it is clean, abstinent,
Yeah.
whatever food that's not, because it's still like a buffer. I always think about
Mhm,
like whenever I run group in person, not that I've done that in a
mhm.
long time now, thanks 2020,
Yeah.
thanks COVID. But I never allowed a table in the room. We had to sit without because
Mm.
the table offered a buffer,
Oh, okay,
right?
okay,
Where
okay.
it's like, no, we're
You're
going to be
smart.
vulnerable, or we're going to be real, right?
Okay.
Well, I
You're
also
smart.
worked in corrections a lot too, so it was also a weapon, but
Exactly.
right, it was also a weapon, but there's
Yeah.
something very vulnerable about just having to
Yeah.
sit in a circle without that in front of us, right? You
Mhm,
can't hold a
mhm,
pillow, you can't like take off your jacket and decide you're going to put it, and you're not going to
mhm,
sit there with crossed arms, right? Like we're going
mhm.
to call these things out, not because we're
Yeah.
being rude, but because there is there's there's too much of that buffer where like I need, right, when I'm working one-on-one or in a group, and I wish, you're right, I wish that therapist would have said something, but maybe she
Yeah.
didn't know, right? She was like, here's this kid who's just
Yeah.
trying to get
Yeah.
better, why would I take that away from her, and she's not
Yeah.
hurting anybody,
Yeah.
right? But yeah, absolutely. So okay,
Okay.
so before I
Okay.
take up any more of your time
Yeah.
and all of that, I have one last question for you. It's kind of like the
Yes.
signature question like we do on the
Yeah.
podcast.
Okay.
But I love everybody's answers.
Okay.
What did you need to hear when you were first starting your journey, whenever that was, like whatever date or age you put on that, like, what did you
Yeah.
need to hear in the beginning?
So what I needed to hear is that I'm brave, I'm strong, you can do this. You survived the first 18 years of your life. You don't have to keep running. You're brave enough to keep going without the crutches. And when I say the crutches, that just means you're stronger than you think you are. Ask for help. You can get through this. You can get through anything. Yeah. Yeah.
It's so beautiful.
Thank you.
It's so beautiful. I love it. And I hope that little Rose, wherever
Yeah.
she is inside,
Yeah.
got to hear that too. You know,
Thank you so
we could
much.
all use that message. Thank you, Rose. I appreciate you so much.
Can I say one more thing?
You absolutely, you go for it.
Okay, so like we're in one of the same Facebook groups, food addiction professionals and whatnot. And then of course, I love Dr. Vera Tarman's book, Food Junkies. I listened to it like 3 or 4 times, and then I'm up on all the podcasts. But you, Molly, are like the bomb.com girl. You're the real deal. You are such a dear heart. And then I was like, maybe I should text her or email her and say, Molly, you talk really, really fast. My brain might not be able to keep up with you, but you are so sweet, girl. I appreciate you. I appreciate this conversation. Keep doing the good work that you're doing in the world.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that. I know I talk too fast. That has always been my issue. Always.
Oh.
But you don't have to listen to me on 1.5 speed. I try really hard to
Podcast, I
slow that
might
down.
not be able to.
I know. I get so excited. I guess that's my problem, Rose. I get so excited, and this has been my issue forever and ever. Amen. Like I was a policy debater in high school, all 4 years, and the judges were always like, I have no idea.
Oh, but thank you again.
Thank
Thank you
you.
again. I
Thank
appreciate you.
I appreciate you. Thank you.
Okay.
Have a great rest of your day.
You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
If you like what you heard today, please remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Thank you for watching.